Florida's Space Coast. The only thing that rivals the power of its rockets is the terror of its depths. In 2003, 10 horrifying shark attacks leave beachgoers reeling. Investigators must uncover the cause before it's too late. In 2003, science writer James Hathaway takes a business trip to Florida and brings his family along.
We were here at Cocoa Beach. We were here to watch a launch for NASA. It was a Mars launch, and the kids were mainly here because, of course, it was a cool beach.
Cocoa Beach lies south of Cape Canaveral, along a stretch of eastern Florida coastline dubbed the Space Coast.
Surf and beach culture here at the Space Coast, it has a lot of history with a lot of contests, a lot of shapers, and the reason why so many people do love the beach and the waves here is because it's warm, it's sandy bottom.
Each year, millions of tourists flock here for sun, surf, and rocket launches. But visitors looking up may miss a threat down below.
When I am in the water, I'm always aware that sharks are there. I think they are out there and they don't really want to be around people, and they like to just stay on the periphery. They like to keep you guessing, but they're 100% the boss.
I've seen guys with bites from their hip down to their knee.
Everybody surfs, and the etiquette around sharks is pretty much keep your hands and feet up and wait for them to go away. A lot of people can surf here their whole life and never even notice a shark. That doesn't mean that the shark's not nearby, but people who are watching for them pretty much gonna see one sooner or later.
From species considered harmless to humans, like the nurse shark, with thousands of tiny serrated teeth, the basking shark, with its wide open mouth, and the lemon shark, to some of the world's most dangerous sharks, like the bull shark. These species all swim here.
When you live along the coast in Florida, shark attacks come with the territory.
There are people today out swimming in this beach behind me, and there are probably sharks out there. So, you know, we all take our chances. It was a gorgeous day. It was just beautiful, sunny, beach was full of people, and the kids were playing in the surf.
Splashing in the water are James's 3 young daughters, including 12-year-old Hannah. After 45 minutes, James joins them.
My wife told me to go out and call them back because they'd gotten a little ways out. So I went out to get them, and I said, come on, guys, time to go back.
But before James reaches the girls, something else does.
A big wave broke right over us, and the shark just literally was in the wave, was right in front of me. It's about 4 or 5 feet long. It surprised me because it was right in front of me. And I went, whoa!
James shouts to get out of the water. His older daughters head for shore. Hannah stays behind, wanting to know what her dad saw.
Hannah was very insistent about knowing and was jumping up and down and just insisting that I tell her.
But it's too late.
Hannah, all of a sudden she goes, out! Something bit me. I got close to her and she lifted her leg up, and blood was really coming off her. It was streaming down her leg. It was a very clear bite-shaped mark.
James gets Hannah back to shore. Soon, paramedics arrive.
You know how it is with kids. You don't want anything ever bad to happen to them, ever. And because of all the people around, she said, Daddy, am I gonna die?
At the hospital, doctors use 13 staples to close Hannah's wound. And she makes a full recovery.
I feel lucky that Hannah's alive and okay after this because, frankly, she could have lost her leg. It could have hit her femoral artery and she could have bled out on the beach.
At no point did I ever even think that there would be a shark in the water. You assume that you have to be deeper, like you have to be a surfer or swimming in the middle of the ocean. You don't think that there's gonna be a shark in shallow water. To this day, honestly, every time I go to the beach, it's kind of always on the back of my mind that there could be a shark in the water.
Hannah's frightening encounter makes headlines. Typically, along Florida's Space Coast, attacks are rare. But in 2003, she's not the first victim, or the last. 10 shark attacks in just 8 months. That's nearly the same number of attacks in the previous decade combined. Locals and visitors alike demand answers.
I do remember 2003, and I do remember there being many reports of shark attacks that year. I think sometimes there's more that happens that isn't even reported.
2003 was our year of the shark because we had 10 recognized as shark attacks, which was the leader in Florida at that time.
Suddenly reality breaks, and you're dealing with the fact that, hey, sharks really do bite people. People really do encounter this. This has happened to my child.
What's behind this terrifying spike in attacks? Perhaps the identity of Hannah's attacker holds a key to its motive.
It's about 4 or 5 feet long. Couldn't quite tell, brownish.
Dr. Dan Huber of the University of Tampa investigates.
Now we're looking at Hannah's scars here 18 years after the attack happened, so we have to try to make an inference from what the scars look like now to what the damage would have been back then in 2003. Now, what we can tell is that these are the teeth of the upper jaw of a shark. The teeth from the lower jaw of the sharks that live off the east coast of Florida are much more needle-like. They would have left individual puncture marks, whereas here we see more of these slash marks, which are the characteristic of the upper jaw teeth. The wound was also described as being very, very symmetrical.
According to Dr. Huber, these characteristics implicate one of 2 possible suspects. First, the bull shark. Bull sharks are fast, powerful, and aggressive, often headbutting their prey before going in for the kill. They're found in shallow, warm waters like Florida. But one key detail points to another attacker.
The symmetry of the wound makes us lean in the direction of a blacktip shark.
Blacktip sharks often feed in small groups and are easily identified by their black-tipped fins. They attack with speed and can grow up to 8 feet long.
Now, one of the most interesting things that we find about blacktip sharks is that they're involved in these large migrations up and down the east coast of the United States in order to stay in water of a preferred temperature.
Shark expert Dr. Stephen Kajura has been studying blacktips for more than a decade. Each year, he witnesses this species take part in one of the most awe-inspiring marine phenomena on the planet.
Every winter down here in South Florida, we have an annual influx of tens of thousands of blacktip sharks that migrate down here and spend the winter from about January through March.
This is the largest shark migration in U.S. coastal waters. As many as 12,000 blacktips swim from coastal North Carolina down to southeast Florida to spend winter in warmer water. And in March, they begin their journey north again. And the Space Coast is directly along their path.
Here we have a map of satellite detections from blacktip sharks that have been instrumented down here in South Florida in the wintertime. And in the winter months down here, you can see that the sharks are off southeast Florida. And then in the spring, March and April, here in the light green, you can see them off the Space Coast area here.
Many different shark species migrate in search of food, warmer waters, or a mate. And typically they do so in deep waters. But the potential problem for beachgoers is that the blacktips prefer the shallows.
These sharks hug the shoreline. They stay right up against the beach, right where the people are, and as a result, you've got the potential for a lot of interactions between these sharks and humans.
Anytime there's an influx of sharks in an area, the chance of encounters with humans also increases.
What's interesting is you've got this strong spike in abundance of these sharks off central Florida to northern Florida in April, which corresponds to the time when you have this spike in bites as well.
Is the number of attacks in 2003 simply the result of this large influx of sharks? The answer comes down to timing. The migration passes the Space Coast in the spring and again in the fall. But only 8 of the 10 attacks took place during that time period. This alone cannot explain the spike. There must be more to the story. Perhaps the answer lies not in the water, but in the skies above it.
3, 2, main engine start, 0, and liftoff.
Engine position looks good.
We were there to see the Mars rover launch.
2003 was an eventful year for NASA. From April through July, when 8 of the 10 attacks took place, 8 rockets blasted off from Cape Canaveral. That's more than the number of launches that took place the previous year during these months. Could this human space exploration have unintended consequences for sharks? Dr. Huber believes the answer relates to how a shark uses its sense of hearing.
Even though you can't see external ears on a shark like we have, they have internal ears just like we do. The hearing mechanism is buried into the base of the skull. And in this central area right here, the skin isn't quite as tightly attached to the skull, and that basically acts like an eardrum. That's how the sound waves are going to enter into the shark's head.
When sound waves reach the inner ear, tiny hair cells vibrate, sending signals to the brain for interpretation. Sharks use their keen sense of hearing to hunt. Some species can even detect sounds from several miles away, but not just any noise.
Sharks are able to hear, particularly at low frequencies.
Sharks are sensitive to low frequencies, the sounds that are made by their prey. But can sharks confuse certain sounds made by humans with those of a fish and come looking for a meal?
The sounds that would be given off from the rumbling engines of rockets being blasted into space is low-frequency sounds.
Could the sound of rockets unintentionally attract sharks and lead to the attacks? Dr. Stephen Kajura explores this frightening possibility.
Right now we're off the coast of southeast Florida. Today we're going to be playing some low-frequency sounds in the water. And these would be the same sorts of sounds like you would get, for instance, if you had a rocket launch.
And here's the amplifier that I will use to power the speaker. And now it's ready to deploy.
As the speaker begins to broadcast, a drone scouts for sharks.
When we see sharks getting close to the speaker, we're going to turn on the speaker, play an underwater sound, a pulsed low-frequency sound, and the drone is going to film the response of the sharks when they detect that sound. See whether they're attracted to it or repelled by it or whether they just ignore it. When we put low-frequency sounds into the water, we would expect the sharks to probably be attracted to them.
But Dr. Kajira's research reveals something surprising.
When playing those sounds, the sharks typically are startled by the sound and will jump and swim away from it.
The reason, it seems, is volume. Though rocket launches are low frequency, they're also incredibly loud.
A rocket launch, that's so much louder, so much beyond the realm of what a typical sort of struggling prey would sound like, that it would probably have the opposite effect. It would startle the sharks, get them away from the area, so they're nowhere near the source of that sound. A rocket launch would have no impact on these sharks biting people.
Something else is behind the 2003 spike. Maybe it's not about what sharks are hunting, but rather what's hunting them. The attack on the Space Coast's first victim holds a clue. Damien Scher is a local artist. He's been surfing these waters for more than 30 years.
If I had to describe the culture in this area, I'd say that everybody surfs. So catch the waves, learn the etiquette, and have a good time.
But in 2003, Damien's good time comes to a halt.
I got to the beach, it was actually around 7 o'clock in the evening. There was a lot of daylight left, and the wind of the day had died down. So caught a few waves and was paddling out with one of my buddies.
A few feet away, there is a huge splash.
I noticed behind him the tail end of a shark just go like this as fish scatter in both directions.
Shark! Shark!
I told him, Zach, you better stop paddling. That thing just went right under you. He didn't see it, and he kept paddling. I saw the shark go under his board.
Damien acts quickly to save his friend.
I slapped the water thinking I can just distract the shark for a moment and make it not notice him. And I distracted it.
But the relief is short-lived.
It hit me like a lightning. It felt like somebody hit me with a baseball bat. And the shark just raked his teeth across my arm, opened it up wide. The force of the impact was amazing, and it just knocked my arm out of the water. I looked down and I saw a hole in my arm, and that's when it started to bleed. So I hollered, Zach, it got me. I knew I needed to get out of the water because I was worried that this blood would attract more sharks. And we rode the next wave into the beach together.
Back on shore, Damien grabs a towel.
I knew I needed a compress to control the bleeding, and I grabbed the towel and kept my arm up, above my heart.
Damien is rushed to the emergency room, where doctors use more than 40 stitches to close his gaping wound.
Here's my shark scar. Starts this far down my wrist and works its way up just about to my elbow. I could have lost my arm, I could have lost my life.
Damien becomes the first of 10 shark attack victims along Florida's Space Coast in 2003, an alarming spike over the previous decade. But the species behind Damien's attack may provide a break in the case.
I saw the whole tail end of the thing come splash out of the water, so there was no mistaking what kind of shark was in my presence. This shark was around 7 feet long. The pattern's really tight, and it's beautiful. It looks like a tropical fish. I could see the pattern of a tiger shark.
Dr. Huber investigates Damien's scar to confirm the ID.
Now, independent of his observations, when we look at the scarring on Damien's arm, there's also evidence of it having been a tiger shark, because the scar is very, very flat. Different sharks have different shaped jaws. Some sharks have more curved jaws, but as it turns out, tiger sharks have very, very flat jaws at the front of their mouth. And this rather straight scar that we see right here is really a type of scar that could only be left behind by a tiger shark. People who spend their entire lives swimming tend to know the sharks that are in the waters that they swim in, so there's a decent chance that he correctly identified the attacking species.
Tiger sharks are named for the vertical stripes found mainly on juveniles. With their sharp serrated teeth, they can easily rip through turtle shells and discarded tires. If a tiger shark bit Damien, then at least 2 species are responsible for the spike, including the blacktip or bull shark that bit Hannah.
There's all kinds of sharks in the water here. You can be out there, not see any sharks, and then all of a sudden you've got sharks, sometimes more than one, all around you.
When you're in the water, you realize just how at the whim of sharks you are, where sharks would be chasing one another away, or if multiple species got into the same area, they might get into some kind of turf war.
Is it possible that different shark species are in direct competition for food, and humans are simply caught in the crossfire? Dr. Michael Heithaus of Florida International University is determined to find out if an interspecies turf war exists in Florida.
We're heading offshore of Palm Beach, Florida, so we can try to find multiple shark species in one spot to just see how they behave when you mix more than one type of shark.
Within members of the same species, sharks seem to coexist peacefully. For example, black-tip sharks tend to spend their time with the same group each day, and even work together to hunt. But does this civility hold true between species? Dr. Heithaus and marine biologist Francis Faribault dive deep to find out.
Florida is an amazing place for sharks because there's so many species we might see here. You might see black tips, bonnet heads, lemon sharks, great hammerheads, tiger sharks, bull sharks. So this is an area where all of those might mix.
Over a dozen lemon sharks swarm the researchers. Named for their pale yellow skin, lemon sharks congregate in large groups and can grow up to 10 feet long.
You see they have no sense of personal space. They kind of nudge into you, but never any aggression.
But when a bull shark arrives, will the lemons defend their turf and cause an undersea brawl?
We had a big bull shark just kind of come up out of the depths, do one circle. No behavior change in the lemon sharks. The bull shark kind of shrugged its fins and said, this is not worth it, and just sunk back down into the murk.
Throughout the experiment, the lemon shark's behavior remains consistent.
While they were excited and curious and maybe up in your personal space, they weren't aggressive or territorial. They never bit us or any other sharks, even though there were plenty of sharks in the water and more than one species.
The thing that we saw today that really fits with everything I've seen throughout my career with sharks is that they tend to be very calm. Big sharks will eat small sharks, but when it comes to that kind of fair match battle, they're not really territorial. You didn't see two species come together and their behavior change and they got more aggressive towards people. That just doesn't happen. When you think about predators on land, mammals like big cats, wolves, coyotes, we think about territories. You know, there's set areas on the land that are kind of defended from other predators. It's their spot. That really doesn't happen as often for sharks in the ocean. And part of that is, why would you bother defending a fish school that by the time you've defended it, some other predators come in and eaten it? So you don't tend to see that territoriality. A turf war is not what caused this spike in attacks in 2003.
Perhaps this strange spike is linked to a different mysterious incident from 2003. Another attack is about to unravel a mysterious clue.
In 2000, here on the Space Coast, we started kind of documenting the shark attacks.
In 2003, Wyatt Werniff is the ocean rescue chief for Brevard County.
2003 was our year of the shark because we had 10 recognized as shark attacks, which was the leader in Florida at that time.
But for Wyatt, one attack stands out.
He was a surfer that I knew. So that made it a little bit more intimate. I knew the guy.
The 21-year-old surfer prepares to catch a wave. But his ride is cut short. A shark clamps down on his left foot and shakes back and forth. The surfer manages to break free and head for shore. But the damage is severe.
Help!
So when I got onto the scene, They were applying a tourniquet with the rash guard. Blood everywhere. The rash guard started out white and was red by the time we got to the ambulance.
The surfer's left foot is seriously injured. But after surgery, he recovers.
The pain that he was exhibiting, that still resonates with me. I swim in these oceans all the time, and I flash back to that episode where that guy, someone that I knew, all the pain still is in my mind to this day.
But there's something else disturbing about that day that Wyatt can't forget. And the two events may be related.
In 2003, on the Space Coast, during the time that we were having all the shark activity, we were trying to figure out why and how, what was causing this. And we did discover, just before the attack, that there was an orange slick in the water, something that we hadn't seen around here before this. So it was very mysterious to us.
This so-called orange slick was a patch of discolored water a few yards from shore. The nature and source of the slick are unknown, causing officials to temporarily close the beaches. What is this suspicious orange slick, and how might it affect sharks? Wyatt wonders if the unusual occurrence could be linked to a red tide.
Red tide is what we would consider an algae bloom, and that algae bloom does have a negative effect on marine life as well as humans.
Florida red tide is triggered by an algae that can cause coastal waters to appear reddish or brown. Is an orange slick the same as a Florida red tide? Dr. Tracy Fanara, who studies algae along the Space Coast, investigates.
Florida red tide is endemic to the Gulf of Mexico. It's only made its way up to the East Coast about 9 times throughout history. And 2003 was not one of those years. The fact that an orange slick was seen before one of the shark bites could be a huge clue, but this was not a Florida red tide bloom.
If not red tide, what caused the orange slick? This outsized question might have a microscopic answer.
I just took a sample of water from the Indian River Lagoon. We're going to look for algae. The Indian River Lagoon is an estuary that, because of currents and water movement, can bring nutrients, pollutants, sediments, and harmful algae into the coastal waters of the Atlantic Ocean.
Today, the water sample shows a healthy lagoon. But in 2003, data reveals that this same area was teeming with pyrodinium.
Pyrodinium. Now, this is a harmful algae species. It's responsible for bioluminescence. People come from all over the world to see this algae because at night, it actually looks like a blue glow. But during the day, it looks like an orange slick.
And this algae does more than just turn the water orange.
Pyrodinium bahamense releases a toxin called saxitoxin, which is a neurotoxin that impacts fish, including sharks.
This neurotoxin can have serious consequences for any animal or human who consumes it.
In 2003, people were getting sick from eating pufferfish that were plagued with saxitoxin from the Indian River Lagoon. And there aren't many species that can actually consume pufferfish. One of those species, though, is sharks.
If consumed by a shark, could this toxin potentially affect the predator's behavior?
Some fish aren't affected right away, but eventually, with enough toxin, they start to swim in a circle, kind of like they're losing their ability to navigate.
Could sick sharks have lost their ability to navigate and accidentally swim inshore where they encountered people? Is this the cause of the 2003 spike in attacks? Something doesn't add up.
because there was only one orange slick reported, it's very unlikely that it was the cause of the increase in shark bites.
Perhaps the answer to why the sharks are biting can be found by analyzing the nature of the bites themselves.
You can see where the teeth kind of like sunk in. It's in the shape of a mouth.
Hannah Hathaway was just 12 years old when she was attacked by a blacktip or bull shark off of Cocoa Beach.
It was really crazy because the shark literally just came and just bit me and then swam away. And I hadn't even been doing anything.
Dr. Huber revisits the bite mark photos of the spike's youngest victim, Hannah Hathaway.
In Hannah's case, the scarring is consistent with a grab and release sort of attack because there's one series of bite marks. So the teeth sank into Hannah's leg a single time. There's no evidence of repeated biting. There's no real evidence of head shaking back and forth to try to remove a chunk of flesh. It was a single bite, the teeth went in, and then apparently that was the extent of the attack.
Based on this single bite, Hannah's father has a theory to explain her attack.
It was a big enough shark. If it was hungry for what it was attacking, that it really could have taken a chunk out of her. It's very clear that the shark just tasted her.
Does taste really factor into why a shark would attack? And could it be that they simply dislike the flavor of human flesh? The predator's anatomy suggests it's possible.
It's been suggested that sharks may be tasting their victims and then deciding about whether or not to continue the attack. While humans have taste buds that are concentrated on our tongues, sharks actually have taste buds that line the entire inside of their mouth, the tongue area as well as up through the roof of the mouth and even onto the gills in some cases.
Though numerous, these taste buds are incredibly small.
If we look inside this spiny dogfish's mouth, really close, we can see there's a series of little bumps that line the roof of the mouth and also the floor of the mouth. And each of those little bumps is a taste bud.
But before a shark tastes, it will try to smell, hear, and see its prey.
Sharks use a lot of different sensory information before they take a bite out of a prey item in order to decide whether or not to eat that particular thing. And when they eventually do take a bite, that bite is that last piece of information that they'll use to decide about whether or not to eat that particular thing. Now, whether or not taste really plays a role in that decision-making process is a bit unknown.
To attempt to find out, Dr. Kajura put shark taste to the test.
What we're going to do is we're going to present to the sharks a couple of different food items. We're going to present to them fish that they would typically normally eat. And we're also going to present to them some pork, which is visually similar, but it's not something they would ever typically encounter.
In this experiment, the pork simulates human flesh.
The reason we're testing with pork is because apparently pig tastes very similar to humans based on what cannibals have told us. And so we want to see whether sharks are actually able to consume the pork or whether they in fact bite it and spit it out.
The sharks in the tank include sandbars, blacktips, blacknoses, and nurse sharks.
To my knowledge, no one has tested whether sharks are able to distinguish between a fish and a piece of pork. It's going to be interesting to see what they actually do.
The food is offered to the sharks through small feeding holes in a safety wall. First up, fish. Without hesitation, the sharks eat the fish.
Having the sharks literally feeding right out of your hand, that was incredible.
Dr. Kajura next offers the pork. But will the sharks bite?
It was interesting that we saw a couple of the sharks actually consume the pork and then spit it out. But whereas one shark would spit it out, another shark would then consume it. For the most part, the sharks ate everything. They were not picky at all. They would eat the pork and the fish. It really didn't matter.
The test provides no clear answers about the taste preferences of sharks.
I think one of the factors to consider here is that these are captive animals, and they're accustomed to being fed. Anything they're fed is something good for them, basically. And you contrast that out in the wild, where the sharks are probably much more particular about what it is that they're eating. Out there, they are probably not accustomed to certain things, and when they encounter them, it makes sense that they would spit them out and ignore them.
Scientists draw a firm conclusion about the role of taste in the spike.
In response to a shark attack, people are going to fight back. We're going to punch and scream and kick. And it's most likely that the reason the shark went away was because of Hannah's reaction to it, and not because the shark had tasted Hannah and decided that it didn't want her.
It cannot explain the surge in shark attacks along the Space Coast. But one thing this theory suggests is that sharks are heavily motivated by the presence of potential prey. And one of the victims in the spike witnessed exactly that.
We noticed there was a lot of bait in the water. You could see birds diving out of the sky, chasing the fish. Could see big fish jumping after smaller fish. The ecosystem was alive. I think my arm just looked like another fish jumping in the water. If a shark's already in a frenzy chasing the bait and you paddle into that, your arm just looks like a fish jumping.
Could the shark have mistaken Damien's arm for a fish? Dr. Huber takes a closer look.
Right now we're looking at a slide of a mouse's eye, because we can use the retina of the mouse's eye to have a better understanding of how shark vision works. As we zoom in on the retina at the back of the eye, we can see what are called rod and cone cells. Now the rods and cones are the photoreceptors, which are actually responsible for absorbing light and then activating the nervous system so that the brain can interpret that as images.
It's these cone cells that give the human eye the ability to see in color. But in a shark's eye, something is missing.
In order to have color vision, you need multiple types of cone cells. Now, sharks typically only have one type of cone in this layer, which means that they typically don't have color vision. So sharks, generally speaking, have black and white vision. And they use that black and white vision to see their prey items in contrast to the surrounding light that comes through the water.
This means that a shark's vision is highly dependent on the clarity of the water. If it is murky, minimal light is able to penetrate the water, resulting in a blurry image. This is key, because the waters where Damien and the others were attacked can be murky. The answer for the 2003 spike suddenly becomes clearer. Ocean scientist Dr. Tracy Fanara demonstrates how murky water could have played a role in the Space Coast attacks.
In this aquarium tank, we have clean water. In this aquarium tank, we have water taken from the coastal waters around Cape Canaveral. Now, this water is colored and turbid because we have organic matter coming into our coastal waters. On top of that, we have a lot of sediment close to the shore, making this water really dark or murky. Here we have two swimmers, this one in a monotone gray and this one with high contrast.
In this experiment, the high contrast swimmer represents Damien's arm in the water, or a shark's prey.
Many baitfish have different contrasts. They'll have a white underbelly and a colored body or different colored fins, or they might even be striped. And sharks have evolved to be attracted to this contrast to be better predators. So as you can see right now, you can see both very clearly in the clean water. But when we bring it over here to the murky water, you might be able to see the swimmer with the high contrast a lot clearer than the monotone gray.
In the case of Damien's attack, his arm could have appeared high contrast, similar to baitfish.
So it's very possible that a shark might have misidentified Damien's arm swimming through the water as baitfish, especially if he was swimming through a group of baitfish.
In addition to blending in with the baitfish, Dr. Huber believes Damien's actions confused the shark.
When a shark came to investigate those baitfish, Damien became concerned that his friend was going to be attacked, so he slapped the water. And in this benevolent action to draw the shark's attention away from his friend, he drew the shark's attention to himself, which is what led to the attack.
This theory may hold water. But when the data is analyzed, investigators find that Damien is the only victim who reported fish nearby at the time of the attack. There has to be more to the story. Perhaps the answer lies not in what the sharks were doing at the time of the attacks, but rather what the humans were doing. Investigators are about to crack the case.
I got to the beach, caught a few waves, and was paddling out with one of my buddies.
Analysis of the data reveals that, like Damien, 70% of the victims were surfing when attacked.
The activity that I would most associate with shark attacks on the Space Coast would have to be surfing.
Coincidentally, a huge surfing festival was held in April of 2003, the same month that 6 of the attacks occurred. This drew large numbers of visitors to the area. And that's not all.
We were in Cocoa Beach. We were there to see the Mars rover launch.
The increased number of rocket launches in 2003 also drew hordes of spectators to the area, further crowding the beaches.
You know, having big events like rocket launches or surfing competitions can bring more people to the beach and put more people in the water.
More people, coinciding with an annual springtime shark migration. Could these events have put sharks and humans in the same waters at the same time?
Along the Space Coast, you have not only these seasonal pulses of migratory sharks moving by north and south, but you also have residents who are there year-round. So you have blacktips, you have spinners, you have dusky sharks, you have sandbar sharks. There's a large number of sharks in that area. And so as a result, you have large numbers of sharks in the water. At the same time, you have a bunch of people in the water.
Anytime there's an increase of humans in an area, the chance of an encounter with sharks also increases. Is this the final piece of the puzzle?
We look around the world, really the only thing that explains the number of shark attacks is the number of people in the water.
The 2003 spike comes down to a convergence of events that puts more people in the water.
It's all about that random collision of sharks and people and bad luck.
A long-awaited answer for residents and survivors alike.
I feel like every day I wake up, I'm lucky to be alive, especially participating in a sport that has its own risks, and having an incident where a shark actually touched me, definitely feel lucky to be alive for sure.
I'm definitely grateful that my dad came out there. I think the entire experience felt a lot safer knowing that he was there. If something worse had happened, I don't know how I would have gotten out of the water.
Well, it's a really unusual and unlucky situation to have this happen. Once it did happen, I think we really lucked out and that it wasn't much, much worse. And this was one of those moments where everything could have changed in an instant.
These are rare events, but when you have rare events, sometimes, you flip the coin and you get all heads. Other times, it's 50-50 or all tails. And I think, sometimes that's what explains years that have more bites. I know it's the most boring answer of all time, but bad luck happens.
Spikes in shark attacks can often indicate something that has changed in the ocean, which often has to do with human impacts. We can use these attacks to better understand our impacts on ocean systems.
And as more people crowd the beaches around the world, investigators worry shark incidents will increase as well.